Well, welcome. I hope you've had a great day so far, and I really appreciate you taking some of your valuable time to spend it here with us, as always. And I really strive to make sure that you get value for that time when you decide to spend it here. And today is definitely going to be no exception. We got the pleasure today of talking with Mr. Noel Massie about negotiating better leadership in the workplace. Or I guess we could have called it, You've Been Promoted, Now What? The New Rules of Leadership. So welcome, Noel. It's so great to have you here.
Cindy, thank you so much for having me on your show today. I really look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to roll up the sleeves and dig in here. For those of you who may not know him, Noel began working for UPS part-time during college. And I love this about his story because he rose through the ranks to become the Vice President of UPS's U.S. delivery operations. A pretty big deal going from a summer student all the way through the ranks to become VP. He oversaw 200,000 employees who were led by 12,000 supervisors. And he's currently a member of numerous boards, the Annenberg Foundation, Los Angeles Urban League's Executive Committee, Chapter 1 U.S., the Asian American and Pacific Islander Legal Center, the list goes on. And he's received over a dozen awards, including the Peter Drucker School of Management Leadership Award, the Whitney M. Young Award, Admiral Samuel Gravely Award, the Civic Leadership Award of Los Angeles, the Civic Leadership Award of Chicago. I mean, we need more time, frankly, to share all of the accolades that Noel brings us. And he currently mentors young leaders in private organizations on values-based leadership principles. So I'm sure it will not come as a surprise to you that I had to have him here. He's an obvious fit for new modes of leadership, which I'm a big fan of. So why don't we jump in, Noah? You talk about leadership as influencing without coercion. And, in a world where power dynamics are often still lean into that sort of command and control kind of approach, how do you personally negotiate influence as a leader?
Influencing someone's behavior is a true definition of leadership, and unfortunately, even people that are great at influence aren't always great with what they do with that influence. There's
Yeah,
no question. I mean, and that's not a now comment, that's a historical.
yeah,
You can go back through
yeah,
history, anyone can and see that. But, I want not just a new leader, but as important, the business owner, the manager of the new leader, to understand how important it is to teach leadership. Although it's not rocket science, it is science.
yeah,
And there's not one single organization. The one thing every organization has in common, whether it's a donut shop or a Fortune 500 company, is
yeah,
someone's going to be the leader.
yeah,
Someone's going to be a leader. And they're going to have an objective they want to get done every single day, whether it's
yeah,
selling donuts or research based medications, et cetera. Someone's going to be leading, and how people lead definitely turns into what they produce.
yeah,
And so when you talk about values, the purpose of the book really is about congruence around values in leadership, right? That the owner of the business, the manager, and the new leader see things similarly when it comes to intentional leadership around topics like fairness, ethics, integrity. Those are foundational principles in the book.
yeah,
And finally, I'll say before I finish with this piece is the foundation of the book is the concept around terms and conditions, right?
yeah,
Something everyone can identify with. You, if you buy a ticket to a concert, you check terms and conditions. You
yeah.
park in a parking lot, terms and conditions. You get a warranty on your car, you have to accept terms and conditions. Well, and so when you hire someone, they walk through the door with terms and conditions.
Yeah.
And if you don't acknowledge those terms and conditions, people quit because people quit people, not companies.
Yeah. Well, you are talking my language, Noel. I love that you talk about, that integrity and values based and all of those things because I feel like somewhere along the line that's been lost. And I want for our listeners to notice, and I think it's fabulous that you talk about whether it's a donut shop or Fortune 500, because I feel like the donut shop end of that scale often gets overlooked when people talk about leadership. Everybody immediately goes to the other end of the scale and forgets that frankly, we need leadership within our family dynamic sometimes as well, right? I mean, in every aspect of our life,
Absolutely, no question.
recognize that. And the other word that you said that I want to really put a pin in for our leaders, notice that Noel talked about intention, right? He'd mentioned that word. And so much of where things fall off the rails is we don't show up with intention. So again, whether it's the donut shop top of the Fortune 500 company, be really intentional about your leadership, what your plans for leadership is, what your leadership style is. So I love that. Now, I mentioned in the intro that you've led over 200,000 people in your role at UPS. What would you say is a misconception that people often have about what it really takes to lead at scale like that? And how do you negotiate, I guess, against that false narrative that most people operate under?
I think with executives, and I was chairman of the board of the LA Chamber of Commerce, which had, 10,000 members, organizations on it, and the board was the biggest one I've ever sat on. And I ended up being chairman of the board for
Wow.
that organization. And we would talk about many dynamics around business. Obviously, that's what the organization was about. But the thing that I always would say to peers that were general managers, presidents, et cetera, especially at the later end of my career, the more mature end of my career, because at that time, I was in my 50s.
Yeah.
And I would say to them, what is it you want your people to understand? Just write that down for me on a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
And inevitably they would write down mission statements and growing sales at
Yeah.
30% or whatever. I don't care, but it would always be that kind of stuff. And then I would share to them that I had run 5 business units as a president, and certainly the way I did it in business unit number 3 looked very different than business unit first time.
Hmm.
But because what I learned is if you are the leader and you're meeting with your senior staff or executive team, whatever,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if it's the HR manager or the CFO or engineering, doesn't matter. And if you ask them that question and then you go talk to the people under them
Yeah.
and the messages were different,
Yeah.
right? Okay, then that said volumes about the pathway and the communication pathway. So the point here is what I began doing differently after I had been the business unit president for a couple of business units is I would go down. I lived on the floor. I lived on the floor amongst the employees,
Yeah.
and I didn't get into any of the hierarchical stuff. I didn't do it in a way to dismiss or diminish their bosses or their leaders. I did it to enhance my personal knowledge around what were our value statements
Yeah.
and how were we communicating them. And so that led to a daily mixture where value-based leadership and intention was first.
Yeah.
Like that, we would talk about those things up front. And over a period of time, particularly in Chicago, when I had that business unit, it was in the U.S., a business unit was a state, just to keep it simple for the listeners, Texas, Wisconsin, you had a business unit president for that stuff. Well, I
Yeah.
had Illinois and Northern Indiana. When I took that thing over, it had the worst metrics in the organization on customer service, production. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
Okay, all that stuff, customer sat, everything. And so over a couple of years, my leadership team and I agreed on what mattered when it came to values after a few minutes. And so 2 things I did personally after self-reflection differently is I started buying books on leadership
Yeah.
that were value-based. One of my favorite writers was David Cottrell because this stuff
Yeah.
is simple and very understandable.
Yeah.
And so I would have every manager in the business unit, it was a couple hundred of them, but once a week, we get in and we sit on a call, like a Zoom. At the time, we didn't have Zoom, so we had a conference call.
Yeah.
And I'd pick a manager to lead a discussion around a value-based topic, whether it was honesty, integrity, trust, fairness, didn't matter. And that never stopped for years. We ascended from being the worst business unit, literally, and I'm not embellishing any part of
Yeah.
it. We were, the CEO of the company at the time was always reminding me of where we stood. And we rose from there into the top 10 within 20 months.
Wow.
We
That's
did.
awesome.
And that's a real story. And and the point of that is it had nothing to do with me being the greatest leader of all time. It had everything to do with creating congruence around values, right? We're all going to have integrity. If it's not right, we're not doing it. Okay. We're all going to be ethical in what we want to accomplish on a daily basis. That is honorable conduct towards others. And that became the foundational principle. And so a lot of other things flowed very differently from there.
Yeah.
So I'd want the president of any organization or business owner to say, what are you doing that you can tangibly tell yourself looks like your value system being executed on the bottom? Because strategy is built at the top.
Yeah.
It's executed at the bottom. That's the way it works in every company, period. And so that would be the biggest point that I'd want to leave your listeners with.
Yeah. Well, I think you're being pretty humble when you say, "Oh, and it wasn't because I was, great or whatever." I bow down to you because I don't know if you know in terms of my background, I have 30 years practicing as a labor lawyer, and it amazed me how few of them spent time on the floor, and not only spent time on the floor as you suggest, listening and learning and seeing how it actually fanned out in operation, but wouldn't listen even when they were approached about, I remember one time employers spent millions of dollars building a new terminal with a group of transit operators. And the operators were saying, this isn't going to work. That layout is going to be, of course, they didn't listen. They plowed ahead. And sure enough, the very first bus that went through the terminal clipped the edge because there wasn't enough room. So, and I want to really, congratulate you. And again, put a pin in for our listeners. Listen to the language that Noel is using. Frankly, I love this conversation already. It's one of the reasons I started the Art of Feminine Negotiation. For so long, we saw integrity and empathy and, compassion and, honesty and those values-based kinds of approaches as a weakness in business. We see a lot of TV and industry that brings this more ruthless approach to business. And I love that you flipped the script and knew to flip the script early in the process. Now, I'd love to circle back, Noel, if we can, when you mentioned about terms and conditions and how you apply those in leadership, which I love. So can you just unpack for a minute an understanding, or how understanding employees' unspoken terms, if you will, can be a form of high stakes negotiations in effective leadership?
The thing that I will say is I want to give credit and homage to my values around leadership to the founder of the company I worked for over 40 years, and that was the founder of UPS named James E. Casey.
Yeah.
Jim Casey built a value-based company when it was really, really not the thing to do. Because he founded it in 1907, and he was only 19 years old at the time. But the point here is that he was an Irish American kid, immigrant. His father was an immigrant, and they immigrated from the East Coast to Seattle. And if you were Irish at the turn of the century in America,
Yeah.
it was not a pretty picture for you. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is because he experienced that type of treatment as a child, when he founded a messenger company in Seattle, Washington, the most important thing to Jim was that they would be a company focused on ethics, integrity, and people,
Yeah.
because he didn't get a lot of that, in his personal life.
Yeah.
And he expected the leaders of his organization as it grew, because today it's 450,000 people, right? So he went from 6 bicycle messengers to a company of 450,000 people,
Remarkable.
which is still, to this day, the largest logistics company ever created by a private human being.
Wow.
Because of one thing and one thing alone. Not because we had the best rocket science product. It was just picking up and delivering stuff for people. That's all there was. We were just doing stuff for people, right? And the bottom line is he expected every leader to reflect those values to the extent that it became a daily diet of conversation. So that's where I learned the importance of intentional leadership. Yeah. So I was really fortunate to be a college student at the time in electrical engineering. And when I was graduating, the organization wanted me to stay because I had actually accepted a job at Hewlett Packard at the time after getting close to graduation from San Jose State. But the organization, when I gave notice that I was leaving, the manager I was working for said, "Hey, listen, kid, we love what you're about and your work ethic, blah, blah, blah. We'd like you to stay here." And I never looked back, and I tell people all the time that the values of the company is what kept me in the organization. So I want to, share that with the listeners to say that that's really was the foundation, for me. So organizations today that lose their way, and I talk about this in the book a bit, actually, and I name a few well-known cases. You being an attorney are familiar with a lot of them, probably, like the opioid cases and, the case with some of the things that weren't ethical at the end of the day that some companies did. So everything that I talk about in the book is all public, obviously. And so it's to get people to understand how that's always a loser, right? That's always a loser. And, when people see engaging with employees as soft, I would tell them, I worked with Teamsters, for 40 years. Okay, they are not a layup to lead. Okay, anyone thinks that a group of union employees is just going to lay down and do whatever you want, you need to think again, right? You have to learn in that environment that the most powerful thing you can do is influence a person's behavior, because here's where the plane lands on that statement. People support the things they help create. There's not a human being in the world that if they help create something, I don't care what it is, a fishing technique, they support that thing,
Yeah.
right? So you're never better off going to your people with something they don't obviously support
Yeah.
and then expecting them to execute it, right? And so it's important for business owners to understand that when they see the signs of disagreement, and what I say to new leaders and any leader, it's not just new leader, I'd say it to my senior staff. Okay, that's like hazard signs flashing. What do you do when you're driving down the street and you see hazard signs? You slow down. What do you do when you hear a train crossing? You slow down. You see the signs. Okay, people have signs.
Yeah.
And if you ignore their stop signs, if you ignore their flashing hazard signs,
Yeah.
okay, saying caution, proceed slowly. If you don't do that, why are you surprised when
Yeah.
there's a wreck? Why are you surprised when there's a wreck? Right. And so that's a metaphor I use with leaders and have for years. I actually have a chapter in the book on metaphor use
Yeah.
and why it's powerful,
Yeah.
because that helps you to understand as a leader, A, people support what they help create. If you see the signs that they have disagreement, then you need to think differently about that and maybe involve them in some way in the direction of the organization on the ground.
Yeah.
That and just talking to your managers isn't doing that, right?
Yeah.
You need to make sure that that person who's the plumber or the electrician, you
Yeah.
go talk to them personally and go, so what did you hear about what we're going to do? And let them speak
Yeah.
without you speaking, right? And that'll tell you how effective you are.
I love the hazard light analogy. I think that's super powerful and so simple, so simple. And again, for our listeners, I want you to think about how you can apply that in your life, because the things that Noel is sharing with us in leadership apply not just in business, but as you were saying that, Noel, I was thinking about how, my gosh, that applies with our, when we're dealing, negotiating or interacting with our kids or with our intimate partner or with family. How often do we ignore the hazard lights and then we're surprised when everything goes to hell in a handbasket? So,
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah. Now you've mentioned, throwing out these some of the values that, you appreciate and that you really encourage people to instill in their business protocols. Listening and empathy, integrity and trust sort of come to mind. And these are often framed as, so-called soft skills or, feminine skills. And everybody's like, oh, because that can't be show strength. But, I think they really are the power tools of negotiation and leadership.
100%.
Which of them would you say has most influenced your leadership style? I mean, I know they have to work together, but what would you say are some of the ones you see being not brought to the table in a way that they should be?
When you ask that question, when I look at the most important foundational value-based areas of importance, the number one that I talk about in my content is integrity.
Yeah.
Right. Integrity is the most important thing your people need to know you have.
Yeah.
Right. They just do. Because when people know you have infallible integrity, and it's like a home, it's the base, right? Then you'll be able to build an environment. You'll be able to build a house that has one wall with fairness, one wall with trust,
Yeah.
one wall with ethics, one wall with commitment and passion. Those things don't come if there's a lack of trust in what you have to say. If the people who are under you can't believe in your word, right? And I always would force, and I literally would force this narrative when I would talk to employees or managers. There'd be something would go on, right?
Yeah.
And I actually, again, cover these things in my content, but, I would say, okay, so we're going to do blah, 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 blah. And they, yep, we're going to do that. Okay, give me your word. And when I would say, give me your word, that's not a promise. That's
Yeah.
not a commitment. The most powerful thing you can extract from a human being is their word.
Yeah.
Because that's integrity. But then they expect that back, right? So it's a two-way street. It's not just me asking for their word. They're like, well, no, this is a pattern with him. So we know he's going to keep his word.
Yeah.
And when employees know you're going to keep your word, it becomes, to me, the most powerful thing you can know you have as a company, as a human being, as a parent, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that's laughable to me when you talk about how people view this stuff as soft, I'm like, are you kidding me? This is the brick and mortar,
Yeah.
okay, of anything you want to do.
Yeah.
And I would say to anyone, and I've done this, go stand in front of a mirror and talk to yourself. And I would say, tell yourself everything you want your kids to be.
I love that.
Right now, tell yourself everything you want your kids to be. Why would you not want your company to be that thing too?
That's
Right. So we go through all these great lengths to make sure our kids have these values and they have good education and the right teachers and training and all of these over the top things we do for our kids, SAT training.
Yeah.
And then I say, so how are you doing the same kind of behavior with your organization? How does that behavior that you value so much with your children? How does that look with your staff? How
Yeah.
does that look with your managers or your employees?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the greatest way to get folks to understand. So the reason I would do that is to influence their behavior.
Yeah.
Period. For no other reason. So they would reflect, not to criticize, demean, none of that. It would be to get them influenced directionally to say, you know what, this is right. It's right. I need to live differently around this issue.
Yeah.
And rarely did that not have a powerful impact on a manager, mid-manager, delivery driver, but that's important, to get people to understand that keeping their word and integrity are congruent.
Yeah.
And those are the two most powerful pieces of values you can put on the table with your organization.
Oh, that's worth its weight in gold right there. And I love that you are great with the metaphors, by the way, like the house analogy and that. You have an uncanny ability to be able, you should write fiction as well. You'd be a great literary fiction writer because you have a fabulous way of expressing what for some people are complicated subjects and framing it in a way that's just so simple to understand. And I want for our listeners as well to talk like integrity. Noel has explained so beautifully why it matters and what happens when you don't have it. And I always love pointing out, because I think people often forget that like integrity in both senses of the word, right? That moral compass where when you give your word, you keep your word, but also based on the old sort of Latin root of it, integer, which is to be whole. And when you act out of alignment with your values, you're not whole. So you're not in integrity. So I think that's such a great point. Now, you've mentioned your book, and I apologize. I don't think I gave it a shout out. So give us the title of your book again there, Noel.
Yeah, the title of my book is Congrats, You've Been Promoted.
I love it.
And the title of the book is what it is. It says, hey, you've been promoted. And I talk about my initial journey in leadership. No one's standing there to show you how to get from A to Z on conflict resolution, talking to your team. And that could be a business owner.
Yeah.
And so I don't want listeners to get confused that it's just for the newly promoted leader, although that's the title of the book. It's really to create congruence.
Yeah.
Between the owner of the business and someone that they just put in a leadership position. Because the most powerful thing I talked about earlier is when I created congruence, like what does ethics even look like, right? Okay, it's great. Integrity. People can say that all day, but what is that even, right? So it's there to help create congruence, but it's Congrats, You've Been Promoted, an essential guide for new leaders and their teams. It's currently in Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It was published by Simon & Schuster, subsidiary of them, and it's on Apple eBooks.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And I think the timing is so important now. I mean, it always had, but sort of post-COVID as well. I think just as you say, this isn't just about for newly promoted people. I mean, there's been such a profound shift. People need to be looking at new leadership models that work. Well, really, this isn't a new leadership model, but sadly, it seems like it in today's world. So, now in your book, you emphasize, fairness and treating people with dignity, and that so resonated. I grew up with my dad was a factory worker, and he was always like, everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. I don't care if you're a brain surgeon or if you are the caretaker in the hospital, everybody has value. So how can new leaders negotiate fairness in workplaces that are still riddled with bias? Like, let's talk about the elephant in the room, especially around gender or race or hierarchy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually open up and talk about how I led multicultural, diverse teams, rural areas, metro areas. I did all of those. There's not one demographic when you're in an organization that hires from the public all through the United States, right? We weren't like in one city with, 5,000 square feet or something. So I had to learn how to lead anybody. And I think it's a misnomer for people to think that they don't have that true leadership isn't learning how to lead anybody, right? It could be a group of women. It could be a group of all men. It could be people that are in the Appalachians and they're not very worldly outside of their arena. That doesn't matter. Okay, there's some things that are universal. And once people come to know that what you do comes from an honest heart, they will be surprisingly strong in their support for you. Yeah. They will believe what you say. They will trust and follow you. That's a quote directly from the founder of UPS. Yeah. That's what I just quoted. That once people believe in your integrity, they will be surprisingly strong in their support for you. And I don't care if it's a woman leading all men. And I saw that actually many times where I had some great female leaders and their entire 100 employee group was all male, right? And they would do a wall for this person because of her integrity. So I think the point here is that there's some things that are universal, and certainly those are. And strong leadership actually is what exudes from a person that's value based.
Yeah.
Because they will not negotiate those values, right? Those values are the values, you know? It's just not. So fairness, which you talked about, is really important for people to understand how bias just exists, right? And a leader, this is funny. I just spoke to him yesterday. He was a great mentor of mine, and he was congratulating me on the book. He gave me a call. But he was one of the greatest leaders I ever worked for because in a moment when I was a president, and he was a tier higher than I was, but I was a president, and I was having a very challenging moment with just a number of natural disaster type things going on, right? Yet we had hospitals and nursing homes and all these things we needed to service, right? And so we were amplified in our emotion and our passion. He says, no, okay, as a leader, you need to understand that there are moments where you don't get to be human. Okay. You just don't get to be human. You have to push the emotion aside and you have to show character because character is the ability to make a worthy decision once the emotion of that decision has passed.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I would find myself in those moments, because we all will, right? You step back, you stop, you pause, and you tell yourself in this moment, I have to make a worthy decision that's not connected to my emotion.
Yeah.
It's got to be connected to the organization, the objective, and what's right for the people while they maintain commitment. And so you have to maintain dignity to them. And when it comes to their dignity, they don't sell you their dignity ever. So you have to realize that fairness is the absence of favoritism. What it is.
Yeah.
Fairness is the absence of favoritism.
Yeah.
I don't care if you have 3 employees that are the best in the world ever and 3 employees that just aren't doing great. When it comes to treating them as employees and people, you don't get to be human. You have to have no bias and say they are part of the team. I'm the coach. Even Michael Jordan had a coach. Yep. I'm the coach, and I need to coach those 3 that aren't doing so well, probably more than the 3 that are. Yep. But there is no favoritism allowed in this moment or in this circumstance. Yep. And that's important. That's important.
Nice. I like that. Now, you write that and I think you may have mentioned it earlier, that employees don't leave companies, they leave leaders. So what would you say to a leader who is unknowingly negotiating their own failure by overlooking their team's needs?
Well, I'd say a couple things to that. You know, first of all, I talked about what the leader and the owner has a responsibility to do with each individual who they have hired to help them succeed, right? Like, why'd you hire this person?
Yeah.
Well, I hired them because I need them to help me succeed. Okay. So tell me about them. Who are they? What are they about? What are their terms and conditions? You know, did you tell them yours? Did you build a mutual agreement that we both will always treat each other respectfully? We will both always have integrity. We will both. So you think about people when they have a partner and the first person they got married to or whatever, or they have someone they just recently met, and they're going to meet the parents. Okay, what do they do when they know they're going to meet the parents? They put their best foot forward, you know, everything hair in place, everything, you know, they want to look perfect. And I'll give you another example. They're applying for credit for a house, right? Okay, so when they're applying for everything's got to be right. Do you have all these details? If the bank asks you for something, you're making sure you get everything right, okay? So you're introducing yourself to the bank or to the parents. Well, when you hire people, you're introducing yourself to them, right? And it should take the same amount of effort, like you were applying for credit, or you were applying to me, or you were going to meet the spouse of the parents, your spouse's parents or your partner's parents. You should put the same energy into meeting your people individually, not group meeting, right? Yeah. You know, and you should understand that 30 minutes just talking about that will make everything else after that look different than it would have without that.
Yeah, that's great. And for our listeners, I hope you're taking notes because there's some really simple, practical, Like game-changing advice that you're getting here. Now, I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about what's the 4x5 method that you have to capture multiple perspectives in any given situation? Because so often conflict I find arises from people being so certain about the correctness of their position based on their perspective and don't take into account other perspectives. So what's your famous 4x5 method on that?
So the book is two parts. Part one is covers most of what you and I have already talked about over the last 30 minutes, which is value based, right? I pound value based leadership principles and why they matter. This isn't just copybook stuff, integrity, fairness, ethics, trust. I tell a lot of stories about that in the book. But part two of the book is tactical,
Yeah.
to be clear. Once they leave that room of values, I want to take them into another room that's about tactics.
Yeah.
And so the tactics in the second room, the 4x5 method, the 7 steps of effective training, delivering a daily message to your team, those things are about tactics. And there's exercises at the end of each chapter to say, now go try this.
Yeah.
Why would you be good at something you didn't practice doing? So the 4x5 method is a great example of that type of thing. So people see things from 4 perspectives, generally as an employee. And there's 5 ways to approach a conversation with an employee with intensity level. So I'll give a small example of that. So I want the leader or whoever is reading the book to understand something. Okay, spontaneity happens in the world. It happens every day. You get in your car. You can't predict the behavior of somebody else. Okay, but you need to be able to react to it quickly, right? We understand the need to be a defensive driver, right? Looking both ways, looking in the rearview mirror. Okay, so the 4x5 method is trying to teach the new leader how to do that, right? To make it natural. Employee comes out of hot, paycheck's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, it's missing 3 or 4 hours of pay, and it's a Friday, and they needed that money. Blah blah blah. Right? So they're going to be really amplified. The 4x5 method teaches the leader how to contain and control that circumstance in a way that's positive. Right? Not to get defensive. Not to do this. Well, I didn't see it coming. Stuff. So the 4 stands for perspectives. The first perspective, of course, is the employee perspective. That's the first perspective. The second perspective is the supervisor or leader's perspective. The third perspective is the company's perspective. The fourth perspective is the customer's perspective. That's that, right? 4 perspectives. The most powerful perspective of the 4 is the employees.
Yeah.
And I'll share with that how that's used. And then the 5 are the intensity levels. What I want people to understand is that intensity should never be communicated in a work discussion, conflict discussion with amplification of voice. It's inappropriate, period. Okay. Because it's really communicated through words. And so the 5 says at the lowest level of intensity 1, I'm going to talk to Cindy about a customer concern. I go, hey, Cindy, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. You got a minute? Right? So that's intensity 1. Now the customer called back the second day. Hey, Cindy, we need to talk about the customer. Yeah. Okay. And so it escalates to the final perspective. It's like shifting gears in the car, right? I'd like to talk to you. I need to talk to you. Yeah. we must talk. Okay. That's how you communicate intensity to a person, right? So in using the 4x5 method, check is wrong. Employee comes at you hot and they're really upset. At intensity level 1, you say, understand, Robert, you're upset. Your check's wrong. I know you need your money. I just used Robert's perspective at a low intensity. Yeah. Robert keeps going. He won't stop. I still stay with Robert. Robert, I understand you're upset. I know you need this corrected. I'm going to correct this for you, Robert, but you need to calm down. Robert can feel that I just went up. Yeah. From I'd like you to calm down to I need you to calm down. Robert keeps going. He won't stop. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to mix perspectives. Well, Robert, I'd like you to calm down, okay, because it's in your best interest, Robert, for us to resolve this, okay? And you being excited and angry isn't going to do that. And as a supervisor, now I'm going to use my perspective, when you've asked me to take care of things, what have I done? I've taken care of them. I'm going to take care of this. But Robert, now I'm going to go all the way to 5th gear. You must calm down or I'm going to have to send you in the office. So you communicate intensity and intent through the first opening statement you make to the person. And so that's what the 4x5 method does. And I give some examples of using it in real life situations. I actually talk about a really gifted supervisor I had working for me years ago who was great at it in that exact scenario, and how he used the 4x5 method to mute it, but he kept the employee self-esteem in place.
Yeah.
It was a satisfactory outcome. Anyway, it's a tool, right?
I love it. It's a
And so,
powerful tool. It's a great
yeah,
resource.
and so that's in the book, and it's a tactic, right? So at least at a minimum, the person who's being addressed in the future who didn't have the method says, okay, what perspective makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And they choose it. So if an employee shows up in tennis shoes and the requirement is steel-toed boots,
Yeah.
the supervisor would say, hey, listen, Larry, today you wore tennis shoes to work, and we have a company policy that will not allow me to work you in tennis shoes. Yeah. And also, Larry, do you realize you could get injured severely in those tennis shoes? And then how are you going to make a living to begin with? You're going to lose pay, be out of work. So that's a low intensity, level one, employee perspective, company perspective. And so it gives the person somewhere to think quickly about how they're going to talk through this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Great resource. I loved it. Now, if a brand new leader is listening right now to this podcast, and I'm sure there are many of them out there, what is one question that you would want them to ask themselves every day to ensure that they're negotiating better leadership and not just chasing promotions?
Oh, for sure. It's what I did. I did it as a president. And, I said earlier that even Michael Jordan had a coach. Okay. Kobe Bryant had a coach. Yep. People who don't think they need a coach are kidding themselves. Everyone needs a coach. Everyone needs to get feedback from somewhere that's going to be unbiased and realistic and developmentally based. What I would do on a daily basis, and I started actually doing it as a manager in the 80s when I became a manager. I had 100 employees under me in the mid 80s, and I was a manager right in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I had a great leader that I worked for at the time, mid manager. And he said, Noel, you need to wake up every day and ask, who did you invest in yesterday? Yeah. It's not who you're going to invest in. Who did you invest in yesterday? Because it held me accountable to coaching and developing the team. Yeah. He says, and he said to me, and I was really fortunate to hear this then, some over 35, almost 40 years ago. He says, you're like a head coach. What do head coaches do? They don't take a minute off during the game. A basketball coach doesn't go eat a sandwich in the middle of the basketball game. He says, football coaches, when the game is being played, they are present. Yeah. You have a responsibility to be present all the time while your people are in their jobs. Yeah. And you have a responsibility to coach them on whatever you think is a weakness. Not just to be upset they have a weakness, but how are you going to make that weakness better? How are you going to train them to be better? So even as I became a president, with my senior staff, CFOs, directors of human resources, I had people in big jobs with 1,000 people under them, right? I spent time with one person a day, even if it was on the phone when I was driving in, right? Because I'd use that time. My commute would be an hour to work or whatever, and I'd call up Cindy and say, hey, Cindy, you're the marketing director. And I'd say, okay, well, we're not going to talk about marketing, Cindy. We're going to talk about whatever it is you want to talk to me about, right? And then Cindy would talk, right? And then I would, in that conversation, lead it to a developmental opportunity Cindy wanted help on or wanted optics on. And I'd say, so how can I help you, Cindy? And no, people never left that blank. Well, you can't help me, maybe I had a person or two try that. Sorry. But generally, 99.5% go, I'd like you to help me with this. Yeah. That's coaching. And it's giving the person the opportunity to say what it is for you and that person to both talk about what development. That's why when I would do annual reviews for salary increases or whatever, there was never a shock. Yeah. I never sat down with a person and had some perspective that was so wildly different than theirs, right? Because we communicated regularly and I coached every day. And that was really the point I wanted to make here is you have, as a leader, just know it, you have, as a leader, 20 minutes a day to spend with one person under you in a conversation. It does exist. And if you don't do that, it's because you didn't desire to do that, not because you couldn't do that.
That's great advice. And again, the thing I love for our listeners out there, I hope you're recognizing how simple these practices are to be able to put into place to enhance your leadership and show up better. And I'm thinking, Noah, it's too bad. I can't believe how quickly our time is going here. And you've got such great information. We should have done this as two separate parts, one on the first half of the book and one on the second. So maybe we'll have to get you back and have a tactical strategy session. I don't know. We'll chat about that after we go off here.
Sounds good.
Like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be about leadership, doesn't have to be about this talking, just one of those aha moments for you that changed how you show up.
The biggest aha moment I had came early in my career, and I think we kind of talked about that a little bit, is when I realized as a leader, I had to take ownership for the actions of my team in a way that reflected me personally.
Yeah.
That blaming them for failure to understand just wasn't going to work, right? That was about, did I sit down and make sure Cindy and I had congruence around a thing? At least I would know we didn't or did in that moment, right? Because this is not about, some fluffy kind of thing. It's about real, transparent interaction between someone who is being paid to do something by a person who's paying them to do something, and coming to an understanding of what that looks like so there's no confusion. So when I understood the importance of ownership creation inside of the employee, then things became very different for me when it came to leadership, because I would spend time on that, right? And the other thing is, I'd say, know what you don't know, right? That there's a lot of techniques out there. There's a lot of things you can learn, like the 4x5 method or the best principle that I talk about in the book. There's a lot of things out there that you can, how much are you willing to invest in you to learn, right? And I would say the worst thing to do with a group of people is speak at them at a level that is, out of some book that's way over their heads, right? That's and I've seen that happen candidly, right? There's so many books about organizational development and blah, blah, but a simple concept around creating ownership in the team has value, but you create that by creating it in you first.
Yeah.
You have to own their development. You have to, and then I really need to get this final one in, because this is a big piece of the book too. I say to the leader, you can't hope to get more than you give. I want to let that set for a minute. But people do. You can't hope to get more than you get, right? So go to a bank and say, I want to make a withdrawal. And the bank goes, okay, great. So how much you got in this bank? And you go, nothing. They go, well, we're not going to do bank robbery. Okay, you don't have to. You leave. You have made no investment here. Why should we give you something? Okay, well, that's how people work. You've made no investment here. Why should I give you something? Okay, so don't come to my window and say, give me a withdrawal, but you've never invested in me. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And I also say this in the book, and this is one of my fun colloquialisms, as you would say. I go, if something doesn't make sense to a person, you know how they hear that? Is nonsense. Yeah. It's the opposite of making sense. So if it doesn't make sense, it's nonsense. And you can try it. Go into a bank and say, give me some money. And they're going to go, do you have any money here? No. They're going to go, well, that's nonsense. Okay. People are the same. People are the same. You can't hope to get more than you give. Yeah. That was, and I don't care what the activity is.
Yeah. Okay? I love it. Love it. And where can people learn more about you, Noel?
Well, they can go on my LinkedIn page. I actually, a lot of what we talked about, I repeat in my masterclass series. I have a 9-episode masterclass series that they can purchase on my website, noelmassie.com. And there's some discounts for volume, of course. Okay. And then, of course, they can buy the book and read that. And then I'm on LinkedIn, and I can be contacted there. And I have an assistant who I'd like to put her information out. And her name is Kayla Bozeman, KAYLAH Bozeman @gmail.com. And she handles communication, anything someone, if they want to have a further conversation, reach out for Kayla and, we can set something up.
Sounds great. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So don't panic if you're somewhere where you weren't able to jot all this down. We'll make sure all of that info is in the show notes for you so you can reach out, including the title of the book so that you can go grab yourself a copy. leadership, whether you're in that position already, whether you're even in the corporate world at all, leadership principles are always going to stand you in great stead in all of your relationships. So highly recommend it. And thank you so much, Noel, for sharing so generously with us here today.
Oh, Cindy, thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation tremendously, and I look forward to future conversations potentially.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to follow up on that. I think you've got so much more, and I barely touched. And just for our listeners, so you know, we barely got the tip of the iceberg of the value that comes from the book. So make sure to check that out. And I'm sure you got loads of value from this episode, even though we just touched the tip of the iceberg. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that, but also make sure to share the episode as well with people in your life who you know could get some benefit from these principles to help them show up with better leadership in their life. And before we sign off, as always, just want to share some ways we can work together if you are looking to up-level your negotiation skills to negotiate a better life for yourself. I've got everything from online to my all the way to the mastermind and VIP experiences available, so you can better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve in life while benefiting everyone around you. If that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. Make sure to grab a copy of my book of the same name if you haven't done that yet, Art of Feminine Negotiation. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and you can start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.